moment I stepped into that courtroom, I knew my past had finally caught up with me. The wooden doors creaked louder than they should have, or maybe it was just my nerves filling the room. Every head turned, some curious, some annoyed, some already judging the gray-haired woman who walked a little too slowly and clutched her purse a little too tightly. My daughter didn't even bother hiding her irritation. She rolled her eyes the way she used to when she was 16 and thought she knew everything about the world. To her, I was just her mother, an inconvenience, a stubborn old woman who refused to stay quietly at home. But when I looked toward the judge's bench, something shifted. His face drained of color. He stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost, his hand tightening on the edge of the desk. He leaned toward the clerk and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw her eyes widen in disbelief. The murmurs in the courtroom faded into a hush, so deep it felt like the air itself had frozen. "Is that her?" he whispered, not quietly enough. I lowered myself into the hard wooden chair, my knees aching, my heart steady in a way that surprised even me. I had prepared for this moment longer than anyone in that room could imagine. No one there knew who I really was. Not the lawyers shuffling their papers, not the strangers waiting for their cases to be called, not even my own daughter, sitting stiffly with her arms crossed, convinced she was finally about to win, if only she knew. As I sat there, waiting for my name to be called, my mind drifted back to a small house with peeling white paint, the smell of burned coffee in the mornings, and a life built on quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed. I wasn't always this woman with trembling hands and tired eyes. Once I was sharp, respected, trusted in ways that changed lives, but I gave all that up for family, for a daughter who promised she'd never forget what I did for her. I remember the day she asked me for help like it was yesterday. She stood in my kitchen, mascara running, voice shaking, saying, "Mom, I just need you for a little while." A little while turned into years. Years turned into silence, and silence turned into this courtroom, where she now claimed I had ruined her life. The irony almost made me smile. The judge cleared his throat, still staring at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe his own eyes. He adjusted his glasses, shuffled a single page on his desk, and then looked directly at me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said slowly, carefully, "before we proceed, there are things this court needs to understand." My daughter stiffened beside her attorney. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the familiar calm settle over me, the same calm I'd relied on long ago, back when decisions carried real weight. They thought this was my reckoning. They had no idea it was my reveal, and as the judge opened the file in front of him, I realized this was the moment everything would finally change for all of us. I could feel my daughter's anger radiating toward me like heat from an open oven, but I kept my eyes forward, fixed on the judge, as he slowly adjusted his glasses. The courtroom was silent now, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. and makes your own breathing sound too loud. Somewhere behind me, a bench creaked as someone shifted uncomfortably. Everyone sensed that this case was no longer routine. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge repeated, his voice steadier than his expression. "For the record, can you confirm your full legal name?" I nodded once. "Eleanor Me Caldwell," I said softly. The clerk's fingers paused mid-typing. My daughter scoffed under her breath. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to her lawyer, loud enough for me to hear. "She's just trying to make this about herself." I didn't turn to look at her. I had spent too many years looking at her face, searching for some sign of gratitude or warmth, only to be met with impatience and entitlement. Today, I didn't need her approval. The judge opened the thick file in front of him and flipped past several pages as if he were searching for something specific. His hands weren't shaking, but they were tense. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said again, "were you ever employed by the state of Illinois?" A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. My daughter's head snapped toward me. "What does that have to do with this?" she snapped. The judge raised a hand. "Miss Reeves, you'll have your turn." I inhaled slowly. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. "Many years ago." "How many?" he asked. "Long enough for most people to forget," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time. His gaze held mine, searching, measuring. I recognized that look. I'd seen it countless times before on younger men who underestimated me, on officials who assumed kindness meant weakness. "Were you," he continued carefully, "at any point assigned to family court oversight?" My daughter let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, come on. Are we really doing this?" I could hear the edge of panic creeping into her voice, even if she didn't realize it yet. "Yes," I said, "for 12 years. The judge closed the file slowly. The sound echoed through the room like a gavel strike. 12 years of my life, long nights, impossible decisions, and cases that followed me home in my dreams. I had signed orders that protected children, separated families, when there was no other choice, and fought behind closed doors to keep the system honest when it tried very hard not to be. And then I had walked away, not because I was tired, not because I was weak, but because my daughter called me crying one night, saying she needed me more than my work ever could. I chose her. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said slowly, "you were the senior advisor on the very committee that helped draft the custody statutes being cited in this case." The room erupted in whispers. My daughter's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. She was home. She was always home. I finally turned to look at her. "I was home," I said gently, "just not in the way you think." Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something urgently, but she brushed him off, eyes locked on me now with something close to fear. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "This court will take a brief recess." The gavel struck. As everyone rose in confusion, my daughter remained frozen in her seat, staring at me like she was seeing a stranger for the first time. And in that moment, I realized the hardest part wasn't what I was about to reveal. It was watching my own child finally understand how little she ever truly knew about the woman who raised her. When we returned to the courtroom, the air felt heavier, like a storm cloud had settled indoors and refused to move on. My daughter avoided my eyes now. She sat stiffly beside her lawyer, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight I worried her teeth might crack. The confidence she'd walked in with so sharp and loud had dulled into something brittle. The judge took his seat and cleared his throat. "We'll resume," he said, though his eyes remained on me longer than necessary. I folded my hands in my lap. They were steady. I'd learned long ago that calm unsettles people more than anger ever could. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge began, "before we continue, I need to clarify something for the record." He paused, then added, "You're not here today to influence this court through prior authority, are you?" I almost smiled. "No, Your Honor," I said. "I'm here as a grandmother who raised 3 children when no one else would." A hush fell again. My daughter let out a sharp breath. "You took them," she said suddenly, unable to hold it in any longer. "You always twist the story to make yourself look like some kind of hero." I turned toward her, slowly, deliberately. "I didn't take them," I said. "You left them." Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, whispering for her to stop, but the dam had broken. "I was overwhelmed," she snapped. "I needed time. I trusted you." "You told me you'd be back before dinner," I replied quietly. That was 8 years ago. A collective inhale swept through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. 8 years, he repeated. I nodded. They were 6, 4, and barely 2. One of them still had a fever. My daughter shook her head frantically. "That's not fair. I had things going on. You never supported me. You always judged me." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. "I supported you," I said. "I paid your rent. I watched your children. I showed up every time you called, but I refused to lie to social services when they asked where you'd gone." Her face twisted. "You could have covered for me and let your children think being forgotten was normal," I asked softly. "No." The judge raised his hand again, bringing order back into the room. "Miss Reeves," he said firmly, "did you maintain contact with your children during those 8 years?" She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "Occasionally," she muttered, "when I could." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, did you ever prevent her from seeing them?" "Never," I said. "I kept the door open. I saved every message, every birthday card she promised to send, and never did." I reached into my worn leather bag and placed a thick, faded envelope on the table beside me. The sound it made when it hit the wood was soft, but final. The courtroom leaned forward as one. "What's that?" the judge asked. I met his gaze. "The truth," I said. "Sealed and dated, letters, records, voicemails. And one decision I made the day I realized my daughter wasn't coming back." My daughter's eyes locked onto the envelope like it might explode. The judge nodded slowly. "We'll review it." As the clerk stood to retrieve the envelope, my daughter whispered, barely audible, Mom, don't. I looked at her then, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the deep, aching sadness of a mother who had waited years for accountability. I already waited long enough, I said. And as the judge began opening the envelope, I knew the story she'd told herself for years was about to collapse, piece by piece, right there in open court. The first thing the judge pulled from the envelope was a stack of letters, their edges yellowed with time, corners softened by years of being reread. He adjusted his glasses again, scanning the dates written neatly across the top of each page. Mrs. Caldwell, he said slowly, these letters appear to span nearly a decade. Yes, I replied. One for every year she didn't come back. My daughter's nails dug into the arm of her chair. I could see it now, the realization settling in that this wasn't a misunderstanding she could explain away. This was a record, a timeline, a life documented in ink. The judge read the first letter silently, his lips pressing into a thin line, then the second, then the third. The courtroom waited. These are addressed to your daughter, he asked. And to myself, I said. I wrote one for her and one for me, so I wouldn't forget what actually happened when time tried to soften it. My daughter let out a hollow laugh. You always loved writing your little speeches. The judge looked up sharply. Miss Reeves, I suggest you remain quiet. He turned back to the papers. This letter, he continued, tapping one page, states that you, Mrs. Caldwell, contacted Child Services within 48 hours of the children being left in your care. Yes, I said. I asked for guidance. Not custody, guidance. The judge nodded. And according to these records, the agency attempted to reach Miss Reeves multiple times. Calls, letters, even a home visit. My daughter shook her head violently. I never got those. They were returned unopened, the judge replied. Marked address unknown. A murmur spread through the room. I felt something loosen in my chest, not relief exactly, but validation, the kind that comes when the truth finally stands on its own, no longer needing you to defend it. Your Honor, my daughter's lawyer interjected, rising from his seat. Even if my client was absent, that does not automatically grant permanent guardianship. You're correct, the judge said calmly, which is why I'm still listening. He pulled out another document from the envelope. This one was thicker, more formal. What's this? He asked. I swallowed. A notarized statement I wrote the night I realized she wasn't coming back. It explains why I kept the children, why I enrolled them in school, why I became, in every sense that mattered, their parent. The judge read in silence. I remembered that night vividly, the way the house had felt too quiet after the children finally fell asleep, how I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I hadn't planned to raise children again. My knees already ached, my hair already gray, but I also knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would not let them feel abandoned twice. The judge looked up. Did you ever tell the children their mother abandoned them? No, I said quickly. I told them she loved them and was figuring things out. I gave her grace she never asked for. My daughter stared at the floor now, her earlier fire reduced to silence. The judge placed the papers back on the desk. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "there's something else here." He pulled out a smaller envelope, sealed, my handwriting unmistakable. "This one is marked to be opened only if they try to take the children." My heart skipped. "Yes," I said. "I hoped it would never be needed." He looked at me carefully. "May I nodded, as he slid his finger beneath the seal. My daughter finally looked up, eyes wide, breath caught in her throat. Whatever was inside that envelope, she knew it wasn't meant for her, and whatever hope she still clung to was about to slip through her fingers. The judge unfolded the letter slowly, as if he understood that once it was read, there would be no turning back. The paper was crisp compared to the others, newer, written with a steadier hand, not because my life had been easier then, but because my resolve had hardened. He read silently at first. Then his eyebrows lifted. Then his jaw tightened. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said carefully, "this letter states that you legally petitioned for emergency guardianship 6 months after the children were left in your care." "Yes," I said, after I exhausted every attempt to reach her. My daughter shot to her feet. "That's a lie. I would have known." The judge raised his voice. "Sit down." She did slowly, reluctantly, but her face had gone pale. The judge continued reading. "According to this, the court granted temporary guardianship, later converted to long-term guardianship due to abandonment and failure to appear." He looked up. "Miss Reeves, you were notified." "I wasn't," she cried. She went behind my back. I spoke before the judge could. "I went in front of the court," I said, "because your children needed stability. Doctors, schools, a home that wouldn't disappear." My voice trembled then, not from fear, but from memory. I waited outside that courthouse for 6 hours, with a toddler asleep on my shoulder. I added, "I wasn't trying to replace you. I was trying to protect them." The judge held up another page. "There's more." He turned the document so the courtroom could see. "This letter includes a declaration that if Miss Reeves were ever to return and contest custody, the court should review the attached evidence before any ruling." He paused, "and attached to this letter is a trust document." The word rippled through the room. "A trust," my daughter whispered. The judge nodded. "Yes, established in the children's names, funded solely by Mrs. Caldwell." My daughter laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. She didn't have that kind of money. I met her eyes calmly. "I did." The judge flipped through the final pages. "This trust covered housing, education, medical care, and according to these terms, legal protection against removal from their primary caregiver." The courtroom erupted. "That's not fair," my daughter cried. "They're my kids." The judge's voice cut through the noise like steel. "Being a parent is more than biology, Miss Reeves." Silence fell again. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, not of triumph, but of release. I had carried this truth alone for so long, afraid of what would happen if it ever came to light. Now it was standing on its own. The judge closed the letter and set it aside. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "there's one question this court must ask." He looked at me intently. "Do the children know any of this?" I swallowed. "No," I said. "They know they are loved. That's all I wanted them to know." The judge nodded slowly. My daughter slumped back in her chair, defeated, her story unraveling piece by piece. But the hardest part was still ahead, because the truth wasn't just about what I'd done. It was about what she'd never been willing to face. And the court wasn't finished listening yet. The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes no longer on the paperwork, but on me. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said gently now, "this court recognizes your legal standing. But law aside, there is a human element here that cannot be ignored." I nodded. I had lived in that space, between law and humanity, for most of my life. He turned toward my daughter. "Miss Reeves, you are requesting immediate custody of 3 children who have lived with their grandmother for nearly a decade. On what grounds do you believe removing them would be in their best interest?" My daughter opened her mouth, then closed it again. The rehearsed lines, the righteous indignation, they all seemed to vanish when faced with that simple question. "They're my children," she said finally. "I deserve another chance." I felt the ache of those words settle deep in my chest. The judge did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "A chance is something you take responsibility for," he replied, "not something you demand." He flipped through his notes again. "Mrs. Caldwell, I see here that you declined adoption when it was offered." "Yes," I said. "Why?" he asked. I smiled sadly. "Because I never wanted to erase their mother. I wanted her to come back ready." My daughter's head snapped up. "You never told me that." "You never asked," I said quietly. The judge nodded. "According to the records, you also requested supervised reunification visits once contact resumed." "Yes," I said. "I believed they deserved to know her, not the version that disappeared, but the one she might become." My daughter's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, surely that proves goodwill, but it doesn't negate my client's parental rights." "Correct," the judge said, "which is why this court must proceed carefully." He turned back to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, you understand that revealing this information today may permanently alter your relationship with your daughter." I met his gaze. "It altered the day she walked away," I said softly. "I just kept showing up." A long silence followed. Then the judge spoke again. "I'm ordering a temporary stay on any custody transfer. The children will remain with Mrs. Caldwell until a full evaluation is completed." My daughter jumped to her feet. "That's not fair." The judge's gavel struck once. "Sit down." She collapsed into her chair, tears spilling freely now, not the angry kind, but the desperate kind that comes when control slips away. The judge continued, "In addition, this court will appoint an independent child advocate." He looked at me. "One more thing, Mrs. Caldwell." "Yes," I asked. "When the time comes," he said, Are you prepared to tell the children the truth? My throat tightened. I'm prepared to tell them what matters, I said. That they were chosen. Every single day. The judge nodded. As the court adjourned, people began filing out quietly, their earlier curiosity replaced with solemn respect. My daughter remained seated, shoulders shaking. I stood slowly, feeling every year in my bones, but also feeling lighter than I had in a very long time. As I passed her, she whispered, "You planned this." I paused. "No," I said gently, "I prepared for it." And as I walked toward the exit, I knew the next chapter wouldn't be written in court documents or sealed envelopes. It would be written in truth, and truth, I had learned, has a way of finding its voice, no matter how long it waits. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual, not empty, just thoughtful. The children were out back, their laughter drifting in through the open window as they chased fireflies in the fading light. I stood at the kitchen sink, watching their reflections in the glass, wondering how much longer I could protect them from the weight of grown-up truths. The judge's question echoed in my mind. Are you prepared to tell them the truth? I had always believed there was a difference between truth and burden. Children deserved honesty, but not fear. Love, but not resentment. And for years, I had walked that delicate line as carefully as I knew how. A knock sounded at the door. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. When I opened it, my daughter stood there, eyes swollen, makeup smudged, confidence gone. She looked smaller somehow, like the child she used to be when she'd crawl into my bed after a nightmare. I just want to talk, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit right away. She paced the living room, running her hands through her hair. You humiliated me today, she said finally. I didn't speak until I was asked, I replied. She stopped pacing. You could have warned me. I warned you 8 years ago, I said gently. You didn't listen. She sank onto the couch, covering her face. I wasn't ready back then. I thought I'd fix my life and come back. And then, I asked. She hesitated. Then it felt too late. The honesty in her voice cracked something open in me. I never wanted them to think you didn't love them, I said. That's why I stayed quiet. She looked up at me then, tears sliding down her cheeks. They love you more than me. That's because I was there, I said. Love grows where care is consistent. We sat in silence for a long moment. Do they hate me? She asked quietly. No, I said. They miss you in the way children miss what they don't understand. She nodded, wiping her face. The judge, he said there might be visits. If you're willing to do the work, I said. She looked toward the backyard, where her children laughed without a care in the world. I don't know if I deserve that chance. No one ever does, I replied. We earn it. When she stood to leave, she paused at the door. You really never meant to take them from me. I shook my head. I meant to keep them. After she left, I stepped outside and called the children in for dinner. They came running, breathless, and smiling, unaware of the storm that had nearly reshaped their world. As we sat around the table, I watched them closely, realizing something important. The truth would come one day. But tonight, what they needed was warmth, routine, a grandmother who would tuck them in and read one more story. And as I turned off the lights that night, I knew the hardest conversations were still ahead. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in carrying them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between grocery coupons and a handwritten note from a neighbor. I knew what it was before I opened it. Court stationery has a certain weight to it. Thick paper, official seals, the quiet authority of decisions that can change lives. I sat at the kitchen table for a long moment, just staring at the envelope, listening to the children argue gently over cereal choices. Life, in its ordinary rhythm, kept moving. When I finally read the letter, my hands trembled not from fear, but from relief. The court's decision was clear. The children would remain with me. Permanent guardianship affirmed, supervised visitation for their mother, contingent on consistency and participation. Therapy for all of us, together and apart. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Nothing felt triumphant, just settled. That afternoon, the youngest climbed into my lap and asked, "Grandma, are we going anywhere?" "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing her hair back. "This is home." She smiled and rested her head against my chest, and in that moment, I understood something profound. Home isn't a place you win in court. It's a place you show up to every day. A week later, we had our first supervised visit. My daughter arrived early, hands shaking, clutching a bag of snacks she'd probably overthought for hours. When the children saw her, they froze, then slowly stepped forward, curiosity battling caution. She knelt to their level. "Hi," she said, voice breaking. "I'm really glad to see you." No grand speeches, no excuses, just presence. I watched from a distance as they talked, laughed nervously, and shared stories that felt both familiar and new. My daughter kept glancing at me, as if asking permission. I nodded. Later that night, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in the living room, thinking about how close I had come to losing everything I loved, not because of malice, but because of silence. I had believed protecting them meant absorbing the truth alone. I had been wrong. Protection also means letting light in. The judge's voice echoed in my mind again. "Are you prepared to tell them the truth?" Soon, I would be, but not all at once. Not as a weapon, not as a confession that crushed their innocence, as a story of love, of a mother who struggled, a grandmother who stepped in, and children who were never unwanted, not for a single moment. I turned off the lamp and sat in the quiet, feeling the weight of years finally lift. The truth had been spoken in court. Now it would be spoken at home. And when that day came, I would be ready. The truth finally came out on a Sunday afternoon, soft and slow, the way hard things should be told. We were sitting on the back porch, the three of them sprawled around me with sticky fingers and half-melted popsicles, the air warm and forgiving. No courtrooms, No lawyers, just cicadas humming and a sky that didn't demand answers. Grandma, the oldest, said suddenly, "Why did Mom leave us here when we were little?" I had known this question would come. I just didn't know it would sound so gentle. I took a breath and chose my words the way you choose stones to cross a river, carefully, knowing one wrong step could send you under. "Your mother loved you," I said, "but loving someone doesn't always mean knowing how to take care of them." They listened, all three of them, quiet, open. "She was hurting," I continued, "and when she couldn't hold everything together, I stepped in. Not to replace her, just to make sure you were safe." The youngest frowned. "So you chose us." I felt my throat tighten. "Every day," I said. "I still do." No one cried. No one shouted. There was no dramatic moment like the movies promise, just understanding settling in slowly, like dust after a long road. Later that night, after they were asleep, I sat alone and thought about the woman I had been when this all began, scared, tired, unsure if love would be enough. It had been not because I was perfect, but because I stayed. My daughter still comes now. Not often, not easily, but she comes. She's learning that showing up matters more than grand apologies. Some wounds don't vanish, they soften, and that's okay. What the judge saw that day in court wasn't a secret identity or some hidden power. He saw a woman who didn't walk away, a grandmother who chose responsibility over resentment, a family shaped not by blood alone, but by consistency, sacrifice, and quiet courage. If there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this: you don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. And sometimes, the people who save a family are the ones who never planned to. They just refused to leave. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.